it's a very different type of politics to what you saw from Boris Johnson or Liz Truss. Much more detailed focused.
So do you think this gives him the chance for a reset, both in relations with the EU, but also in domestic politics? In other words, does he have a space on which to change things more widely?
I think so. I mean, it's a beginning. It's not the answer to everything, but it's something that has one big advantage, which is it plays to his real personality. It's something that he's been able to do, which genuinely reflects the fact that he is a focused, intelligent, detailed, focused person, and he's produced the goods on the back of that. The question now is whether he can take the reputation he's built through doing that and turn it into something that can win an election. And there are a number of problems that he'll face. The biggest, of course, is the economy. The second is that many people who voted Remain attempted to say, okay, he fixed the problem, but he was part of the people who created the problem in the first place. And finally, the fact that the Conservative Party remains very, very fractured, and Boris Johnson clearly remains ambitious to return as Prime Minister.
So, he is now clearly taking on people who disagree with him about Europe. He is forging a friendlier relationship with Europe. Do you think that he should be as tough on the dissenters today as Boris Johnson was on you and others back in the day?
Well, it's a very good question. So obviously Boris Johnson threw out myself and Ken Clarke and Nicholas Soames and 21 people who voted against the type of Brexit deal he was pushing ahead with. And we certainly weren't behaving quite as outrageously and disloyally as Boris Johnson seems to have been behaving recently. So he'd have good reason to do it. But I think it's difficult to do because I think at that point at which Boris Johnson threw us out, the Conservative Party was very much caught up in the Brexit movement, and we were seen as an obstacle to getting it through. And I think that isn't the case now. I'm afraid that Boris Johnson, although I loathe him, I think he's a terrible person, terrible Prime Minister, is still popular with many people in the Conservative Party, and it would be a big step
to do that. Of course, by chucking out your lot, as it were, then he tilted the party a bit to the right. I know these are crude terms, and I'm interested, having listened to Michael Gove talking earlier on today, as to whether the party is now going to be tilted a bit more back towards the centre, back towards One Nation conservatives. And I was talking to a former cabinet minister from one of the recent regimes about this big gathering later in the week of Tory MPs looking ahead to the future. And he said, but the party is split. There's people like me who want lower taxes and a smaller state. And then there's all the rest of them. And I said, you mean people going to this? He said, yes, the Social Democrats. And I just wondered if we are seeing a bit of a turn in the sort of centre of gravity of the Tory party.
Well, there's no doubt that Rishi Sunak is now distanced from the sort of Liz Truss, quasi-Kwarteng, and to some extent Boris Johnson crowd. They have accused him of betraying Boris Johnson. They've accused him of undermining Liz Truss's slightly bonkers ideological fantasies about extreme tax cutting without balancing the budget. So he's definitely put himself on the path to a more centrist, more moderate, more sensible type of conservatism. And he's communicating that not just in policies. He's communicating that just in the way that he conducts himself, the way that he speaks. But you're also right that this is not the Conservative Party of David Cameron or Theresa May. He was a big Brexit supporter, a big advocate of Brexit. He was a chancellor in Boris Johnson's government. And as you say, that turn of the Conservative Party to the right was partly because in the 2017 and 2019 election, MPs who'd been more on the left of the party were replaced in quite large numbers with MPs who would be more on the right. So the maths of the party has changed over the last 5 years.
Luciana Berger, who had to leave the Labour Party over the anti-Semitism period, has returned to the Labour Party under Keir Starmer. You've just described the direction of travel, at least, as more sensible and more centrist and more moderate. And I wonder, therefore, whether it's becoming the kind of party that Rory Stewart might rejoin.
Definitely a party I'm much more sympathetic to. I mean, I'm very, very proud of what Rishi Sunak did. I'm very proud to praise him.
And you could see yourself signing up to the Conservatives perhaps in the future?
Not quite there yet, I guess. Not quite there yet. But I think it's a lovely development in the sense that I was very worried we were living in an age of populism. I was worried that we were living in an age of very, very superficial, very kind of simplistic, coarse politics. And I think Rishi Sunak and to some extent Keir Starmer represent a move back to a more thoughtful style of politics.
So you're not ready to sign up yet, but would you vote for them, given what you've seen of Rishi Sunak over the last few days?
I'd be much, much more impressed. So for someone like me who represents, I suppose, the sort of the left of the Conservative Party, the more centre of the Conservative Party, I think the last week has transformed my perception of Rishi Sunak.